Deep in the forests of northern Vermont, where the trees grow so thick the sky becomes a narrow strip of gray overhead, a dirt road winds through the wilderness towards something hidden. The road has no signs. The mailbox at the end of it has no name. A cabin sits at the clearing's edge. One story, hand-built, every joint fitted with a precision that takes decades to learn. Along the top of the doorframe, someone spent weeks carving leaves and branches into the wood for a person who was never supposed to find this place. Inside, the walls hold something. Not money, not deeds, something older than that. A young woman kneels on the floor in the fading light, pressing her palm flat against a baseboard that sits differently from all the others. A gap uniform and exact, designed to move. She pushes. The wood slides open without a sound, and inside an envelope, her name on the front, written by a hand she has never seen before. The morning Marin Ashford turned 18, her stepfather dropped a black garbage bag on her bed and told her she had until noon. Not a suitcase, not a box, a garbage bag, the industrial kind, the kind people use for yard waste and broken appliances and things they never want to see again. He stood in the doorway of the room she had slept in for 11 years, arms crossed, and said only clothes and personal items. Leave the furniture. Then he walked away without using her name, because he never used her name if he could help it. She was always your daughter when he spoke to her mother, as though Marin belonged to someone else entirely, as though Gary Millard had simply been a man who agreed to share a house with a stranger's child and had now grown tired of the arrangement. Marin sat on the edge of her bed for a long moment after he left. She looked at the walls. There was a scratch near the window frame from 6th grade, the year she had tried to hang a poster with a thumbtack and misjudged the angle. There was the small wooden shelf she had built herself at 14, from scraps she found behind the hardware store, the joints uneven but holding, because she had used wood glue and patience in equal measure. She had learned that on her own. Nobody had taught her. She started packing. It did not take long. 2 pairs of jeans, a few shirts, her work uniform from the Wendy's on Route 9, still folded from the last shift, a toothbrush, the photograph from the top drawer of her nightstand, the one she had kept there for as long as she could remember. She held it for a moment before sliding it into the front pocket of her duffel bag, the one spot where it would not get bent or creased. The man in the photograph was 24 years old. Dark hair, tired eyes, a careful smile. He was holding a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket, and on the back of the photograph someone had written in pencil, Joel and Marin, first week home. Her father, dead since she was 3 years old. Construction accident. That was all Diane had ever told her. And Diane had told her that exactly twice in 18 years, as though saying it more often might make it more real than she could bear. The kitchen was quiet when Marin came downstairs. Diane stood at the sink with her back turned, washing a pan that was already clean. Her hands moved in slow, even circles over the surface. Marin stopped at the edge of the room. "Mom, nothing. Mom, look at me." Diane turned off the water. She dried her hands on a dish towel, slowly, taking more time than the task required. Then she turned around. She looked at Marin for exactly 1 second before her eyes dropped to the floor. "You have $34? Marin said. "Because that is what I have. That is everything." Diane opened her mouth and closed it again. Then she said, "You are an adult now. You will be fine." "I am asking you a direct question," Marin said. "Not him. You. Do you have $34 you can give me?" Diane picked up the dish towel and began refolding it. She pressed the edges together with the careful attention of someone performing a task that required great concentration. Her mouth was set in a thin line. Her eyes stayed on the counter. "Gary thinks it is time," Diane said. "I am asking what you think," Marin said. Diane did not answer. She set the folded towel on the counter and turned back to the sink. Her shoulders pulled inward. Marin stood in the doorway and looked at her mother's back. She had spent years trying to read the shape of that silence, trying to find something hidden inside it, some love that could not find its way to the surface. What she found instead in this moment was something she had not expected. Not cruelty, not coldness, relief. The relief of a woman who had made a decision she was not proud of and had finally reached the moment where she no longer had to carry the weight of postponing it. That was worse than anything Gary had said or done. That was the thing Marin would carry with her for a long time after. She picked up her duffel bag and walked through the living room, past the couch where she had done 11 years of homework, past the television Gary watched every night while she ate dinner standing up in the kitchen. She opened the front door and pulled it shut behind her. Her car was a 2004 Honda Civic she had bought for $800 with money she had saved from 2 years of Wendy's shifts. The check engine light had been on for 3 months. The passenger window did not close all the way, leaving a gap at the top that let in cold air and, when it rained, a thin trickle of water that pooled in the door panel. She threw her duffel bag in the back seat and sat behind the wheel for a long time before she could make herself turn the key. She had $34, no permanent address, no references besides a fast food manager who might not remember her last name, no way to shower before a job interview. She did not let herself feel those things as losses. She listed them the way a person lists materials before beginning a project, honestly and without sentiment, because knowing what you have is the first step toward figuring out what to do with it. Then she pulled out of the driveway and did not look back. The first night she parked in a Walmart lot on the edge of town, she reclined the seat as far as it would go and used a rolled-up sweatshirt for a pillow. She woke 4 times, once to a truck idling 2 spots over, engine rattling at low frequency. Once to slow footsteps on the asphalt, deliberate passing close. Once to the sound of someone trying door handles down the row of parked cars, methodical and patient. The 4th time she woke for no reason at all and lay there watching the rectangle of sky through the windshield shift from black to gray to the thin, washed-out blue of early morning. She did not feel sorry for herself. She felt alert. The second day, she put $9 of gas in the tank and ate a cheeseburger in a gas station parking lot and scrolled through job listings with one hand while she held the charging cord at exactly the right angle with the other, because if she moved the cord even slightly, the phone lost power and the listings disappeared. Nobody was hiring someone with no fixed address. She applied anyway to 4 places because the alternative was not applying, and she had already decided she was not going to choose the alternative. The photograph of Joel Ashford sat on the passenger seat. She had moved it from her duffel bag after the first night, some instinct she did not examine too closely. She found herself glancing at it at stoplights, at the tired eyes and the careful smile, at the baby in the yellow blanket who did not yet know what was coming. Her grandfather on her father's side, the one Diane had mentioned exactly once, had died before Marin was born, or that was what Diane had said. Marin realized, sitting in that parking lot, that she had never asked a single follow-up question. She had accepted it the way children accept the facts of their world, as fixed and unquestionable as weather. The 3rd day, she parked at a rest stop under a row of pine trees and brushed her teeth in the public bathroom and ate the last of some fries she had bought the night before, cold and limp, sitting on the hood of the Civic with her feet dangling. She had $17 left. She had no plan beyond the next 2 hours. Her phone rang, unknown number. She answered because she always answered unknown numbers. When you have no address, your phone is the only door anyone can knock on. "Miss Ashford," said the voice on the other end. "This is Philip Gaines from Harrison and Associates. I am calling regarding the estate of Chester Ashford." Marin pressed the phone harder against her ear. The pine tree stood very still. "My grandfather died before I was born," she said. "My mother told me that." There was a pause. Not a confused pause. A careful one. "Chester Ashford passed away 6 months ago," the man said. "He was 76 years old. He lived in Cedar Falls, approximately 5 hours north of your listed address. He named you as the sole beneficiary of his estate." Marin did not speak for a moment. "He came to my office every year to update his will," Philip Gaines continued. "Every year he asked me the same question." "What question?" Marin said. "He asked whether I had been able to find you." She looked at the photograph of Joel Ashford on the passenger seat. The careful smile, the yellow blanket. Something shifted inside her chest, a wall she had been pressing against without knowing it, a wall that had simply and silently ceased to exist. "What did he leave me?" she asked. "A cabin," Philip Gaines said. "He built it himself. The property is paid in full, no outstanding debt of any kind." He was very specific about that. He wanted to make sure you would not have to worry about it when you arrived. "He wanted to make sure when I arrived," Marin repeated. "Not if." "That is correct." Philip Gaines gave her the address and told her his office was on the main street, across from the post office. He had been trying to reach her for months, he said. The number Chester had on file was a disconnected line, Diane's number. Then, before he ended the call, he said one more thing. "There is something you should know before you make the drive." In the weeks after Chester's passing, a company called Meridian Land Group contacted my office. They wanted to purchase the property. I declined to provide any information until the estate is properly executed, but they were persistent, and I have reason to believe they may have found other avenues of inquiry. I would recommend you come as soon as you can. Marin sat on the hood of the Civic for a long time after the call ended. Other avenues of inquiry. She thought about what that might mean. She thought about her mother. She pushed the thought aside and focused on what she could do right now. She drove to a used bookstore in the nearest town and sold 3 textbooks she had kept from high school. They gave her $18, which was enough for gas. She put the photograph of Joel in the duffel bag, then changed her mind and put it back on the passenger seat. She started driving north. The landscape changed around her in stages. Strip malls became farmland. Farmland became something quieter, stretches of open field where nothing had been planted yet, the soil dark and turned and waiting. Then the trees came, first in clusters at the roadside and then in continuous walls on both sides, closing in until the sky was just a narrow strip overhead, pale and clean. She stopped once for a bottle of water and a granola bar and ate it standing beside the car, watching the late afternoon light move across a field. 5 hours after she left the rest stop, she crossed a narrow bridge over a creek and saw the sign, Cedar Falls, population 800 and something. The last digit had faded past reading. The town was small in the way that small towns are small when they have never tried to be anything else. A main street with a hardware store and a diner and a white-painted church and a general store with a hand-lettered sign in the window. A post office that could have been a garden shed. She pulled into the only open parking spot and cut the engine. Philip Gaines's office was already dark, almost 5 o'clock. She would go in the morning. She got out of the car and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, not sure where to go. Then she walked into the general store because it was open and because she needed to be somewhere with a ceiling. The woman behind the counter had white hair pulled back in a loose braid and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She was stacking cans on a shelf with the unhurried competence of someone who had done the same task 10,000 times. She looked up when the bell above the door rang. She looked at Marin for exactly 3 seconds, and then her hands went still. "You are Chester's granddaughter," she said. Marin stopped in the middle of the store. "How did you know that?" "Because you look exactly like your father." The woman set down the can she was holding and came around the counter without hurrying. "I am Agnes Perkins," she said. "I was Chester's neighbor and his closest friend for the better part of 20 years. Her eyes were direct and steady and warm. And she moved with the ease of someone who had been expecting this moment. Maybe not today, maybe not this week, but eventually, always eventually. "He talked about you every day," Agnes said. "Every single day." Marin stood in the middle of the store with her duffel bag over her shoulder. Her throat tightened. She bit the inside of her cheek and kept it together. Agnes did not try to hug her. She did not get emotional. She simply looked at Marin for a long moment with those steady eyes, and then nodded once, slow and certain, as though something she had been waiting to confirm had now been confirmed. "Have you eaten today?" she asked. "I had a granola bar this morning." Agnes went to the back of the store without another word. She came out carrying a brown paper bag. She put bread in it, and peanut butter, and 2 apples, and a box of crackers, and a bottle of water. She set the bag on the counter. "I cannot pay for those," Marin said. "Chester paid for them a long time ago. He left money at this store every month. Said it was for when you came." Agnes pushed the bag forward. "I have been setting it aside for 6 months." Marin picked up the bag. Her hands were unsteady. She looked at Agnes and said the only question that mattered. "What was he like?" Agnes leaned against the counter. "He was a carpenter," she said. "Built houses in this county for 40 years. After your father died, he went through a hard stretch. 2 years of it, drinking, mostly alone. He was somebody I did not recognize during that time, but he pulled himself out. What changed him? One morning, he showed up at the front door of this store at 6 in the morning, sober, shaved, wearing clean clothes for the first time in months. He looked at me and he said, 'Agnes, I made a promise to my son, and I intend to keep it.'" She paused. "He could not get to you. Your mother blocked everything he tried. So he built instead." "He built instead," Agnes nodded. "He said, 'If I cannot bring her here, I will make sure the place is worth coming to.' He worked on that cabin every day for 15 years, every single day." She told Marin she had been left a key in a lockbox at the lawyer's office, a combination Philip Gaines had given her in the message. She gave Marin directions, 2 miles up Old Creek Road, left fork where the road split, mailbox with no name on it. And then she said one more thing, something she said quietly, with the kind of weight that comes from knowing something for a long time and finally having someone to tell it to. He did not leave you just the cabin, Agnes said. He left you something inside it. I do not know exactly what or exactly where. He told me he was doing something, but he said it was between him and you. Whatever it is, he wanted you to find it yourself. Marin drove out of town with the groceries on the passenger seat beside the photograph of Joel. The road went from asphalt to gravel to dirt, and then the trees came in close on both sides, until she was moving through a tunnel of branches with the last of the daylight filtering through in broken pieces. The cabin appeared at the end of the road as the trees opened up, small and solid and absolutely still. One story, a covered porch across the front with a railing that needed work, one post leaning slightly. The roof was weathered but straight, and even from the driveway she could see the care in it. The way each shingle overlapped the next, with a consistency that only came from patience. And along the top of the door frame, running the full width, was a carved border of leaves and chinches, hand-carved every line of it. Someone had spent weeks on that trim, maybe longer, working the wood with chisels and patience and nothing else. The key was in the lockbox exactly where Philip Gaines had said. Brass, old, heavy in her hand. She put it in the lock and the door swung open without a sound. The hinges had been recently oiled. Someone had been maintaining this place. The inside smelled like cedar and still air. A small living room with a stone fireplace built from flat field stones fitted together without mortar. A kitchen with a window over the sink that looked out onto a backyard of weeds, and one large oak tree with low, heavy branches. One bedroom, one bathroom. Everything built from the same warm-toned wood, fitted with a precision she had never seen in any house she had been inside. Every shelf was perfectly level. Every drawer slid open and closed without catching. Nothing in the structure moved the way things move when they settle or age. It was all exact, all intentional. She set her duffel bag on the bedroom floor and walked through the room slowly, running her hand along the shelves and the counters and the window frames. She found a broom in the closet and swept every floor. She wiped the counters with a damp cloth she found under the sink. She tested the faucets. The kitchen sink pushed out brown water for 10 seconds and then ran clear and cold. The bathroom worked without any trouble at all. She made a peanut butter sandwich and ate it sitting on the living room floor with her back against the wall near the fireplace. That was when she saw it. She had been looking at the baseboards without really seeing them, the way you look at anything that is where it is supposed to be. But something about the one directly behind her caught her attention, and she turned to look at it properly. It was the same wood as everything else, the same warm tone, the same smooth finish, but it sat differently. Every other baseboard in the cabin was flush against the wall, seamlessly tight, not a gap anywhere. This one had a gap running the full length of it, uniform from one end to the other, exactly the same width all the way across. Not the kind of gap that comes from wood contracting in dry air, the kind that is designed to be there. She set down the sandwich. She pressed one end of the baseboard. Nothing. She pressed the other end. The entire piece slid sideways on hidden runners, smooth and completely silent, and disappeared into the wall. Behind it was a compartment lined in cedar, about 8 inches deep and 2 feet wide. Inside were 3 white envelopes, sealed, standing upright against the back of the space. Each one was labeled in the same neat, steady handwriting. Marin age 6, Marin age 7, Marin age 8. She picked up the first one. Her fingers were trembling. She slid her thumb under the seal and opened it carefully. A birthday card, simple, a drawing of a cake on the front with candles that someone had colored in by hand. She opened it. Happy birthday, Marin. I hope this one reaches you. I sent a card to your mother's house, but it came back like the others. So I am keeping this one here instead. You are 6 years old today, and I have never stopped thinking about you. Your father would be so proud of the person you are becoming. Even though I have not been allowed to see it. I love you, sweetheart, Grandpa Chester. Marin sat on the floor of the cabin her grandfather had built, and she cried, not quietly, not with any kind of control or composure. She pulled her knees to her chest and pressed the card against her heart and wept until her ribs ached, until the light through the windows turned the deep orange of late evening, until the room went dim around her, and the only sound was her own breathing and the distant creek she had crossed on the way into town. He had not forgotten her. He had never forgotten her. He had been here 5 hours north, writing her name on envelopes she never received, keeping them safe inside the walls of a house he built on the promise that she would one day come. He had kept that promise to a granddaughter he had been prevented from knowing in the only language available to him, which was wood and patience and time. She sat there until it was fully dark and she could no longer see the card in her hands. Then she wound it carefully back into its envelope and set it on the floor beside the other two. She had come here with $34 and a duffel bag and a photograph of a man she had never known. She had come here believing that no one in her family had ever really chosen her. Every word of that belief she was beginning to understand had been a lie. Someone had chosen her. Someone had chosen her every single day for 15 years, quietly and stubbornly, and without any expectation of acknowledgement or reward. He had chosen her in the absence of any response. He had chosen her when the courts said no, and when the letters came back, and when there was no mechanism left to him except the one he had always known best. He had built her something, and she had finally come to find it. She woke up on the bedroom floor with her jacket pulled over her like a blanket and the first thin light of morning coming through the window. She had slept without waking. It was the first time in 4 days. She lay still for a moment and listened to the cabin. There was no sound inside it. Outside, birds were moving in the oak tree, and somewhere beyond the tree line, the creek she had crossed the night before was running over stones. She could not see it from here, but she could hear it if she held her breath, a low and constant sound underneath everything else, steady in the way that only moving water can be steady. She got up and made coffee with the supplies Agnes had sent her home with and stood at the kitchen window while it brewed. The oak tree's shadow fell across the backyard in a long diagonal, shortening slowly as the sun climbed. The weeds were thick around the base of the trunk. Beyond the yard, the tree line began, and beyond the tree line, the land continued in a direction she had not yet walked. She pulled the property document from her duffel bag. She had looked at it only briefly the night before, in the dim light of her phone. She looked at it now in the morning light, and the number registered differently than it had the first time. 40.3 acres. She looked up from the paper and back through the window at the trees. She had assumed the cabin sat on a standard lot, a half acre, maybe a full acre, the kind of land that comes with a modest house in a modest town. But 40 acres was not a lot. 40 acres was a forest. Chester Ashford had spent 15 years living alone in a one-room cabin on 40 acres of northern Vermont woodland, and he had never mentioned this land to anyone in a way that had reached her. She thought about what Philip Gaines had said on the phone, a company called Meridian Land Group, persistent, other avenues of inquiry. She thought about what 40 acres of Vermont timberland near a planned highway corridor might be worth to a development company, and the number that formed in her mind was large enough to make her set down her coffee cup. She had a meeting at the lawyer's office later that morning, but first there was more to find. The kitchen was the next place she searched. She worked methodically, starting at one end and moving to the other, checking every surface she touched before moving to the next. She pulled drawers out and looked behind them. She pressed along the backs of the shelves. She checked the inside of the cabinet above the refrigerator, running her hand along the top surface where dust had gathered undisturbed. The panel under the kitchen sink was a single piece of wood, the same grain and finish as every other surface in the room. But she had learned the night before that Chester's hiding places did not announce themselves. She pressed along the bottom edge of the panel. There was a slight give, a barely perceptible flex that should not have been there in a piece of wood fitted as tightly as everything else in this kitchen. She pressed harder, and the panel tilted forward on a hidden hinge, swinging outward to reveal the space behind the plumbing. 6 envelopes, ages 9 through 14, each one standing upright in the cedar-lined space, each one slightly thicker than the last. She sat on the kitchen floor and opened them in order, with her back against the lower cabinet. The birthday cards were the same simple style as the first 3, a clean image on the front, Chester's handwriting inside. But behind each card was money. Folded bills, 20s and 50s, creased once and tucked against the back of the card. She counted the bills as she went. By the time she reached the age 14 envelope, she had counted nearly $400 in cash that her grandfather had meant for her to have and that she had never received. The message inside the age 12 card was longer than the others. "I send a card to your mother's house every year," Chester had written. "They all come back, so I will keep them here instead. I do not know if you will ever see these, but I write them anyway because the alternative is to do nothing, and I made a promise to your father that I would never do nothing." She sat with that for a moment. She thought about what it meant to make a promise to someone who was already gone. She thought about what kind of person keeps a promise when there is no one left to hold them to it. She reached back into the compartment, and her hand found something else. Pushed to the rear of the space behind the last envelope was a small wooden box about the size of a paperback novel. She pulled it out. The wood was sanded to a near-perfect smoothness, with a small brass clasp on the front that clicked open with the lightest pressure. Inside, fitted precisely into a hollowed cavity, was the mechanism of a music box, a metal comb and a cylinder sized exactly to the space, with a small brass winding key on the side. She turned the key. The mechanism engaged with a soft ratcheting sound, and then the music began, slow and clear and deliberate. A lullaby she did not recognize, but which felt immediately familiar in the way that certain things do, not because you have heard them before, but because they are made in the right key. The notes filled the quiet kitchen one at a time, patient and unhurried. On the inside of the lid, burned into the wood with a fine tool, were 5 words. "I made this for you." She sat on the kitchen floor and held the box in her lap and let it play until it wound down. Then she wound it again. She closed her eyes and listened. And in the silence of the cabin, in the sound of those careful notes, the absence of the people who had made this place did not feel quite so absolute. She was still sitting there when she heard tires on the gravel outside. She went to the window. Agnes's truck. The older woman climbed out carrying a casserole dish in one hand and a paper bag in the other, moving up the porch steps with the unhurried certainty of someone who had been coming to this place for years. Marin opened the door. Agnes held up the dish. "Chicken and rice," she said. "Nothing fancy. I did not want to come too early. Figured you needed a night to settle in." She set the paper bag on the kitchen counter, milk and eggs and butter and coffee, and looked around the cabin the way someone looks at a familiar room they have not visited in a while. "He kept this place perfect," she said. "I have been coming every week since he passed, making sure the pipes did not freeze, nothing got in." "You have been driving out here every week for 6 months," Marin said. "I promised him I would." Agnes set the casserole on the counter, was not about to break a promise to Chester Ashford. They sat at the small table near the fireplace, Marin in the wooden chair and Agnes on an upturned crate she found in the storage closet. Marin ate while Agnes talked, and the food was the best thing Marin had tasted in a week. "After your father died," Agnes said, "Chester came apart. He had been a strong man his whole life. Built houses in every kind of weather, never missed a day of work in 40 years. But losing a child is different from any other loss. It broke him in a place that is hard to reach and harder to repair." "Tell me what happened," Marin said. "To my father." Agnes set her hands flat on her knees. "Joel was a carpenter, same as Chester. Learned the trade from his father, had his own small residential business by the time he was in his early 20s. Good work, honest pricing. He had a real future in it. But he took a job on a high-rise construction site about 60 miles south because it paid 3 times what residential work paid." "Why did he need that kind of money?" Marin asked, even though some part of her already knew the answer. "Chester had a heart condition," Agnes said. "He needed surgery. The insurance would not cover the full cost. The gap was $12,000, and the hospital wanted it before they would schedule the procedure. Joel took the construction job to close that gap." She paused. Her voice remained steady, but something moved behind her eyes. "Chester begged him not to go. He said he would rather die in his own kitchen than put Joel on a scaffold he did not trust. Joel told him, 'You raised me alone after my mother left. You taught me everything I know. Let me take care of you for once.' The scaffold collapsed during the 3rd week. Joel was 4 stories up. The room was quiet for a moment. Chester never forgave himself," Agnes said. "He believed Joel died because of his bad heart and his lousy insurance, and no amount of reasoning could move him from that belief. Some men carry guilt like a tool they cannot put down, even when it is destroying their hands." Marin looked at the birthday cards on the table between them. 9 envelopes. 15 years of trying. Then Agnes said something she had been holding back, or perhaps only now found the right moment to say. "He did not just build the cabin," she said. "Every time he sold a house, every time he completed a contract job and had anything left over, he bought land. Quietly, a piece at a time, whatever parcels came available around the cabin. He did it for 11 years. I did not understand why at first. One evening near the end, he told me, he said, 'Agnes, I cannot bring her here, but I can make sure that when she comes, no one can take it away from her.'" Marin looked at the window. Through the glass, she could see the edge of the tree line, and beyond it, the 40 acres she had not yet walked. Someone knocked at the front door. She went to answer it and found a man on the porch she had not seen before. He was large in the shoulders and broad in the chest, with the kind of hands that come from decades of physical work, thick at the knuckles and rough along the edges. He was perhaps 60 or a little past it, wearing a flannel shirt that had been washed too many times and work boots that had been resoled at least once. He looked at Marin with an expression she could not immediately classify. "My name is Ezra Webb," he said. "I have a woodworking shop on the east side of town. I worked alongside Chester Ashford for a long time, and I wanted to come and say my piece before someone else said theirs." Marin held the door and waited. "Chester and I had a dispute," Ezra said. 2001. He underbid me on a residential contract by $3,000. I lost the job. That year I had 3 kids in school and a shop payment, and I nearly did not make it through the winter. It was a hard thing, and I held it against him for a long time. He was watching her face as he said it, as though measuring how she received the information. She received it without expression, because she had learned early that the best way to hear difficult things was quietly. "Did he ever address it?" she said. 2 years later, Ezra said, after he got sober, he came to my shop at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday, and he said, "Ezra, I did you wrong and I am sorry." Then he handed me a check for $3,000. "Did you take it?" Ezra looked past her for a moment out at the tree line. "No," he said. He looked back at her. "But I have wished more than once that I had." She studied him. Then she said, "Why are you here?" Ezra was quiet for a moment. He looked past her at the cabin, at the door frame with its hand-carved trim, at the porch boards and the railing and the joinery and the corner posts. He looked at it the way another craftsman would look at it, with recognition and something close to respect. "He built well," Ezra said. "Better than almost anyone I have seen work in this county. He deserves to have someone maintain what he built." He looked at Marin directly. "I have some lumber in my shop that would match the wood on your porch railing. Same species, close enough in grain. That third post needs replacing." He set a length of lumber against the porch railing, nodded once, and walked back down the path without waiting for a response. Agnes had appeared at Marin's shoulder. She watched him go. "He is the only person in Cedar Falls who did not come to Chester's funeral," Agnes said quietly. "And he is the one who put flowers on the grave the following week. Alone, early in the morning, when he thought no one would see." That afternoon, Marin drove into town to meet Philip Gaines. His office was a narrow room with pine floors and 2 windows facing the main street. Philip was a careful man in his mid-50s. With reading glasses he took on and off as he talked, and a habit of pausing before he answered any question, as though he believed that every question deserved at least 3 seconds of silence before a response. She put the savings bonds on his desk. He picked them up one at a time and examined the serial numbers and the issue dates. "These are legitimate," he said. "United States Treasury Series bonds issued in your name. They are yours, Ms. Ashford. What are they worth?" Chester calculated the value himself about 2 years ago. His number was approximately $47,000. With interest accumulated since then, likely a bit more. She looked at the 15 piece of paper on the desk between them. 15 years. 1 bond per year. A man who lived alone on 40 acres in the Vermont woods, building houses for other people and saving what he had left for a granddaughter who did not know he existed. "The cabin is yours as well," Philip said. "No mortgage, no liens. Property taxes paid through the end of the current year. He paid them every January, in person. He would come in and hand me a check and say, 'Make sure she does not have to worry about that when she gets here.'" Philip looked at her over his glasses. He always said when, never if. He opened his desk drawer and removed a second envelope, older and thicker than the first. "Chester left this with me separately," he said. "He told me to give it to you only after you had been to the cabin, only after you had time to look around. Inside were property deeds. 12 of them, for 12 separate parcels of land, each acquired in a different year, each adjoining the others in a pattern that Marin began to understand as she spread the documents across the desk. Chester had not inherited 40 acres. He had assembled them deliberately and over more than a decade, purchasing whatever became available, stitching the parcels together one piece at a time, until the whole was larger than any individual part. "What is the assessed value?" she asked. Philip was quiet for a moment. "Based on current market conditions," he said, "and the planned highway development to the east, I would estimate the land alone at somewhere between 1.1 and $1.4 million. The room was very quiet. Chester left a note with the deeds, Philip said. He unfolded a small piece of paper and read it aloud. "Do not sell, not because of the money, because the land does not lie. Let her decide when she understands why I built it. She drove back to the cabin in the early afternoon with the deeds on the passenger seat. She was crossing the main street when she noticed a man standing outside Agnes's store who she had not seen before. He was wearing a suit jacket that belonged in a city, and he was looking at the storefront with the appraising attention of someone calculating square footage. He was not from Cedar Falls. People from Cedar Falls did not look at buildings that way. She parked and got out and crossed the street toward him. He turned when he heard her footsteps and arranged his face into an expression of professional warmth. "Boyd Holt," he said, extending his hand. "Meridian Land Group, based in Burlington. You must be Marin Ashford." "Who told you I was here?" she said. He hesitated for just a fraction of a second, which was long enough. "We reached out to the family some weeks ago," he said, "as part of our standard outreach when a property of this nature comes available." "The family," she said. "Who specifically?" Boyd Holt adjusted his jacket. "We spoke with Diane Millard," he said. She expressed some interest in discussing the situation and indicated she would consult with family members before moving forward. "She is not a beneficiary," Marin said. "She has no standing in this estate." "Of course," Boyd said smoothly. "That is precisely why I am here, to speak with you directly. Meridian is prepared to offer a very fair market price for the full 40 acres. We are talking about life-changing money for a young woman in your position. What is your offer?" 1.1 million, he said. "All cash, clean close, 30 days. She looked at him without speaking for a moment. He had good posture and a practiced expression, and he was very comfortable with silence, which meant he had done this many times before. "Before you answer," he said, "I want to be transparent with you about something. Your mother signed a letter of intent indicating the family's interest in selling. It is not legally binding, but I think you should be aware of it before making any decisions." She took his card when he offered it. She looked at it once and put it in her jacket pocket. That evening, she went back to searching. The bedroom was next. She worked the room carefully, pressing along the floorboards, knocking against the walls, running her fingers along the interior of the closet from floor to ceiling. The panel was on the wall opposite the window. The same warm wood as everything around it, the same finish, the same dimensions as a structural wall panel. But when she placed her palm flat against it and leaned her weight in, she felt a give that was not structural. She worked her fingers around the edges until she found a small wooden catch recessed into the trim at the lower corner, barely wider than her thumb. She pressed it, and the panel swung inward on a piano hinge. The compartment behind was deeper than the others, deeper and darker, the cedar lining a richer shade, as though the air inside had circulated less over the years. 2 bundles of envelopes, bound separately with lengths of kitchen string. She brought them out and sat on the bedroom floor in the fading light. The first bundle was 15 envelopes addressed to Diane Ashford at the house Marin had left 9 days ago. Every single one bore a thick red stamp on the front, returned to sender. The handwriting on the stamp was Diane's. She opened them in order. The first letter was written by a man 8 months sober, careful and formal, asking for a single afternoon visit. The second came a year later, after he had filed for visitation rights and been denied, and the language had changed, less formal, more direct. The sixth letter said, "I know you read these before you send them back. The postmark shows they were opened. I do not understand what I have done that is so terrible you would keep a grandfather from knowing his son's daughter." The 12th letter, written 5 years before Chester died, was the shortest. "Diane, I have stopped filing petitions. I have stopped hiring lawyers. It does not work, and I cannot afford it anymore. But I want you to know one thing. I have not stopped. I will never stop. I am building something for Marin. When she is old enough, she will find me or I will find her." I believe that absolutely. She set the letters down. Her hands were not shaking. Something inside her was not still, but her hands were steady, and she recognized this as a kind of strength she had not known she possessed until this moment. She untied the second bundle. One envelope, older than the others. The paper had yellowed along the edges and softened to the texture of old cloth. The handwriting on the front was not Chester's. It was a younger hand, faster and less careful, written by someone who had not yet learned to slow down. The envelope was addressed to Dad. She turned it over in her hands once, twice. She understood what this was before she opened it. She understood it with a certainty that had nothing to do with reasoning, the way you understand certain things in the body before the mind catches up. She opened it. "Dad, I know you do not want me to take this job. I know the site is bad and the foreman cuts corners, but your surgery is in 6 weeks and the gap is $12,000, and I am not going to let you skip it again. You raised me alone after Mom left. You taught me how to build a house from the ground up. You gave me everything you had and you never once complained about it. So let me do this one thing. I will be careful, I promise. But if something happens, which it will not, take care of Marin for me. Take care of my little girl. Promise me that, Dad. Just promise me, Joel Ashford. He had written it the week before the scaffold came down. Marin sat on the floor of the bedroom her grandfather had built, and she stopped breathing. The words went out of focus. She pressed the paper against her chest and curved forward until her forehead touched her knees, and she stayed like that, completely still, not making a sound, while the room went dark around her, and the creek ran on outside, and the oak tree moved slowly in the evening wind. She did not hear Agnes come in. She did not hear the front door or the footsteps in the hallway. But at some point Agnes was there, sitting beside her on the floor, close enough that Marin could feel the warmth of another person without being touched, without being asked to speak or explain, or be anything other than what she was in that moment. When Marin could finally lift her head, she handed the letter to Agnes without speaking. Agnes put on her reading glasses and read it. Then she took off her glasses and pressed the bridge of her nose between her fingers and was quiet for a long time. Chester never showed me this, she said finally. It was in the wall. I know. Agnes folded the letter carefully along its original creases and handed it back. He carried that with him every day until he died. Your father chose to go. Chester knew that, but knowing a thing does not always release you from the weight of it. They went outside and sat on the porch in the cooling air. The light was going fast. A mail truck appeared around the bend in the road and slowed at the mailbox. The driver, an older man with a gray beard, leaned out the window. You must be the granddaughter, he said. Marin looked at him. Your grandfather sat on this porch every single evening, the man said. Rain or shine, I never saw him miss it. One time I stopped and asked what he was doing out here all by himself. He looked at me and he said, I am waiting. She will come. One day she will come. The truck pulled away. Marin sat on the porch step and looked at the road for a long time after the sound of the engine faded. Then she heard it. Tires on gravel. Coming up the road from the direction of town, she stood. Through the trees at the bend, she saw headlights. And then the vehicles came into view. A silver sedan she recognized, and behind it, another car she had not seen before. Diane stepped out of the sedan. And in the passenger seat, visible through the windshield even in the fading light, was the face of Gary Miller. Before any of that, Marin had one more thing to find. She went back inside and knelt in front of the stone fireplace. The flat field stones were fitted together without mortar, each one placed with a precision that made them look like a single continuous surface. She ran her fingers along the edges, pressing gently as she moved from stone to stone. One near the base of the hearth sat slightly higher than the others, just a fraction of an inch, not enough to notice unless you were looking. She pressed it and pushed sideways. It shifted. She worked the stone free and set it carefully aside. Beneath, it was a small brass handle set flush into the subfloor. She pulled it. A section of floorboard lifted on hidden hinges, revealing a compartment the size of a shoebox. Inside was a thick manila envelope and a small wooden box, darker than the music box, heavier. She lifted out the manila envelope first. Inside were court documents, pages of them, printed on heavy paper with official stamps and case numbers. Chester had filed a petition for visitation rights when Marin was 6. He had attached character references from Agnes, from his doctor, from 2 former clients whose houses he had built. He had included proof of 18 months of sobriety and a letter from his AA sponsor. The response from Diane's lawyer was stapled behind it, 4 pages alleging Chester was an unfit influence. And behind that, a sworn statement from Gary Millard claiming Chester had appeared at their home intoxicated and made threats. Marin read that line twice. She thought about the man who carved leaves and branches into a doorframe for a granddaughter he had never been allowed to know. The judge's ruling was 3 pages long. The last paragraph was the one that mattered. The petition is denied. She set the court papers aside and opened the wooden box. Savings bonds. 15 of them, each one issued in the name of Marin Ashford. At the bottom of the box was a folded piece of paper covered in Chester's handwriting, shakier than the cards, slower, written near the end. He had added up the values, approximately $47,000. Underneath the bonds, tucked flat against the bottom of the box, was one final envelope. Not a birthday card, not addressed to anyone, just a letter written on lined paper from a legal pad. She unfolded it and read, Dear Marin, if you are reading this, then you found the cat cabin and you found what I left for you. I hope you found it in order. I want to tell you why I hid everything in the walls instead of putting it in a bank or giving it to a lawyer. The answer is simple. She cannot steal what is hidden in the walls of a house she will never visit. Your mother took the money I mailed. She destroyed the birthday cards I sent. She turned every lawyer and every judge against me. But she never came here. She did not know this cabin existed. I need to tell you about your father. Joel died on a construction site on April 14th. He was 24 years old. He took that job to pay for my heart surgery because my insurance was worthless and the hospital wanted $12,000 up front. I told him not to go. I told him I would rather die on my kitchen floor than put him up on a scaffold he did not trust. He went anyway. He said, "Let me take care of you for once, Dad." 3 weeks later, the scaffold gave out and he was gone. I got sober because I made Joel a promise. I promised him I would take care of you. That is the only promise I have left, and I intend to keep it, even after I am gone. The bonds are yours. The cabin is yours. Everything I built and saved for 15 years, I built and saved for you. You have your father's hands, Marin. I know that even though I never got to see you hold a tool. Whatever she tells you about me, know this. I loved you every single day. I loved you when you were born, and I held you and you grabbed my finger so tight that I laughed out loud. I loved you when the court said no. I loved you when I was drinking and could not love myself. I loved you when I built this cabin and when I hid these letters in the walls. I love you now. Wherever I am, I love you now. Your grandfather, Chester. Marin sat on the living room floor, holding the letter when the headlights swept across the window. She folded it carefully along its lines and put it in her jacket pocket. Then she stood up and went to the door. Diane was walking up the path. Sandra moved slowly, the way people move when they are preparing themselves for something they cannot fully prepare for. She had sunglasses on, despite the fading light, and her hands were clasped in front of her, fingers gripping each other. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at Marin. Then she looked at the cabin, at the carved doorframe, at the railing, at the joinery in the corner posts. Gary stayed in the car, engines still running. "Can I come up?" Diane said. Marin looked at her mother for a long moment. Then she said, "How did you find me?" "The lawyer's office," Diane said. "They called the house, the old number Chester had on file." "Come up," Marin said. Diane climbed the steps slowly, one hand on the railing. She ran her fingers along the wood as she came up, feeling the grain. She took off her sunglasses when she reached the top. Her eyes were swollen at the edges and red, and she looked as though she had not slept in at least a day. Marin did not offer her the chair. She stood with her coffee cup and leaned against the railing and waited. Diane sat down in the wooden chair near the door without being invited. She looked at the porch floor for a moment. Then she looked up. "We need to talk about the property," she said. "What about it?" "Chester left everything to you. The cabin, the land, all of it. I should have been informed. I am your mother." "You are not his next of kin," Marin said. "I am." He made sure of that. Diane's jaw tightened slightly. "I am not here to fight about the will. I am here because you disappeared. You did not call. You did not tell me where you were going. You handed me a garbage bag and told me I had until noon." Diane looked at the floor again. She did not deny it. Marin set her coffee cup on the railing. She went inside and came back a moment later carrying the bundle of letters, still tied with kitchen string. She set them on the railing one by one, fanning them out so the front of each envelope was visible. 15 envelopes, 15 red stamps. Diane's handwriting on every one of them. "He wrote you every year," Marin said. "One letter for every year he was sober. You sent every single one back." Diane stared at the envelopes. The color left her face in a way that was visible even in the low light. "You told me he was dead," Marin said. "You told me that more than once. He was alive 5 hours north of where we lived for my entire childhood, and you told me he was dead." "He showed up at our house drunk," Diane said, "when you were 4 years old. He was pounding on the door at midnight. Gary had to call the police one night," Marin said. 14 years ago, he got sober 8 months after that and never drank again. You do not know what it was like. You were a child. I was a child who was told she had no family left. That is what I was." The car door opened. Gary got out and walked up the path with his arms crossed. He stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked up at Marin the way he had always looked at her, with the detached impatience of a man who had decided long ago that she was not worth his full attention. "This has gone on long enough," he said. "We drove 5 hours to have a reasonable conversation, and you are standing up there treating your mother like she is on trial." Marin looked at him. "Go back to the car, Gary. Do not talk to me like that. This is a family matter." "You are not my family," Marin said. you have never wanted to be, and you are not going to stand on the porch of my house and tell me how to speak." Gary's face reddened. He took one step toward the stairs. "Whatever your grandfather left you," he said, "it is probably not worth the gas we spent driving up here." The man was a drunk who lived in the woods. Whatever he managed to save is not going to change your life in any meaningful way. "It is $47,000 in savings bonds," Marin said, "and $1.2 million in land." The words landed. Gary stopped moving. His mouth opened and then closed without producing a sound. He stood at the bottom of the steps with his arms still crossed and his face showing, for the first time Marin could remember, something she had never seen there before. Not anger, not dismissal, uncertainty. Agnes's truck appeared around the bend in the road and pulled to the side without coming all the way in. Agnes got out and leaned against the hood of the truck with her arms folded. She did not approach. She did not need to. Ezra Webb's truck came in from the other direction a minute later, and Ezra got out and sat on the tailgate and looked at nothing in particular. The man from the hardware store who had delivered supplies earlier in the week drove past, slowed, and parked on the verge. He just stopped. Gary looked at Agnes. He looked at Ezra. He looked at the man from the hardware store. Then he looked back at Marin. And something shifted in his face, the expression of a man who has just understood that the room he walked into is not the room he thought it was. "Diane," he said, "let's go. We are done here." Diane did not move. Diane looked at her husband. Then she looked at Marin. Then she looked at the letters on the railing with their red stamps in her own handwriting. "Go ahead," she said quietly. "I will be a while." Gary stared at her. Then he turned and walked back down the path and got in the sedan and reversed it back down the dirt road without turning around. The sound of the engine faded. The taillights disappeared past the tree line. Agnes watched until they were gone, and then looked at Marin and gave the smallest possible nod before she turned and leaned against her truck again. Ezra picked up a stone from the ground and turned it over in his hands. Marin looked at her mother sitting in the wooden chair her grandfather had built. Diane's hands were in her lap, her shoulders had pulled inward, and she looked smaller than Marin had ever seen her, as though something that had been holding her upright from the inside had quietly given way. "Why?" Marin said. "Just tell me why." Diane took a long breath. She did not look away this time. "When I look at you," she said, "I see Joel." Marin waited. "You have his face, his hands, the way you tilt your head when you are thinking something through, the way you go completely quiet when you are angry instead of raising your voice. Everything about you is him. It has always been him. And Chester's letters, every single one of them, had Joel's name in them. Joel would want this. Joel would be proud. What would Joel say?" She stopped. Her voice had developed a quality like something being bent past the angle it was designed for. "I could not read his name without coming apart. Every letter Chester sent was another version of the same wound." She pressed one hand over her mouth for a moment. The birds had gone quiet in the oak tree. "I was 24 years old when Joel died," she said. 24 with a 3-year-old daughter and no income and a father-in-law who was coming apart at the seams and showing up at my door in the middle of the night. I could not carry all of it. I was not built to carry all of it, so I closed the doors. I closed every door I could find, and I told myself it was for your protection." She looked at Marin directly. "But it was not for your protection. I know that now. I was protecting myself from having to remember every single day what I had lost." "You could have let me have someone," Marin said. "One person who wanted to be in my life." Diane's face broke in the way that faces break when a person has been holding something for a very long time and finally stops holding it. Not dramatically, quietly. She pressed both hands over her eyes and her shoulders shook, and the sound she made was small and completely without performance. "I was not protecting you from him," she said. Her voice was barely audible. "I was protecting myself from remembering, and I let that take 15 years from you. From both of you." Marin stood on the porch her grandfather had built and looked at her mother and felt something move inside her that she did not have a clean name for. It was not forgiveness. It was not absolution. It was something smaller and more honest than either of those things, the recognition that the person in front of her was not a villain, but a woman who had been broken by grief and had done the best she could with the pieces that remained, and that the best she could do had not been enough, and that both of those things could be true at the same time. She went inside. She poured a second cup of coffee from the pot on the counter. She brought it out and set it on the arm of the wooden chair without saying anything. Diane took it with both hands and held it. They sat together on the porch in the dark for a while, not warmly, Not easily, but together, which was a thing that had not been true between them for a long time. After a while, Diane asked if she could see inside. Marin took her through the cabin room by room. Diane moved slowly, touching the shelves and the window frames and the smooth wood of the kitchen counter. She stopped in the bedroom doorway and looked at the duffel bag on the floor. "You have been sleeping on the floor," she said. "There is no bed. I could send you one. I will get my own." Marin showed her the birthday cards from the baseboard compartment. Diane read them standing in the living room, and her hands shook the entire time. "He was a good man," Marin said. "Whatever happened between you and him, he was a good man." Diane was quiet for a moment. "He was a broken man who loved well," she said finally, "and I was a broken woman who did not." She wiped her eyes. "I am sorry, Marin. I know that is not enough." "No," Marin said, "it is not," but she meant it without cruelty. It was simply the truth, stated plainly, because they were both too tired for anything else. Diane called Gary to come back and collect her around 8 o'clock. She walked down the porch steps and the sedan appeared at the end of the road, and she got in and they drove away. Marin watched the taillights until they were gone. 20 minutes later, Agnes came up the road, carrying a pie tin covered in foil. "Blueberry," she said. She set it on the railing. "You stayed," Marin said. "I saw enough." Agnes sat down on the step beside her. "You handled that well. I did not handle it at all. She just talked and I listened. Sometimes that is the whole job." Agnes looked out at the dark tree line. "Your mother is not a wicked person, Marin. She is a woman who lost her husband at 24 and never found a way to carry the weight of it without setting something else down. Some people grow larger after grief. She grew smaller. She stole 15 years. She did." Agnes's voice was even. "And she stole 15 years from Chester, and she stole something from herself that she will probably never fully recover. There is no version of this story where she came out whole." They ate pie on the porch, step in the dark, Agnes talking about ordinary things, the order of lumber coming to the store for a customer, the way the creek had been running higher than usual since the last rain. Easy things. Marin ate and listened and let the ordinary weight of it settle around her. After Agnes left, Marin went inside and sat in the wooden chair by the fireplace. She took out Chester's final letter and unfolded it on her lap. She had read it once already, but she read it again now, slowly, the way you read things that need to become part of you. She went to the last paragraph. "Whatever she tells you about me, know this. I loved you every single day. I loved you when you were born, and I held you, and you grabbed my fingers so tight that I laughed out loud. I loved you when the court said no. I loved you when I was drinking and could not love myself. I loved you when I built this cabin and when I hid these letters in the walls. I love you now. Wherever I am, I love you now." She folded the letter and held it in her lap. The music box was on the table beside her. She wound it and let it play. The notes moved through the quiet room one at a time, and she sat in the chair her grandfather had built and let them. In the morning, she drove to Philip Gaines's office and confirmed the bonds. 49,300 and some dollars with interest. The cabin clear of any claim. The land fully and legally hers. She signed the documents Philip put in front of her. Her hand was steady. When it was done, she gathered the bonds and put them back in the wooden box and thanked him and walked out into the morning. Boyd Holt called that afternoon. She was sitting on the porch with the property deeds spread across her lap. "Meridian has authorized me to increase the offer," he said. 1.35 million. Cash close, no conditions. This would be the final number. She looked out at the tree line. The light was coming through the upper branches at a low angle, and the shadows of the trees fell long across the yard. Somewhere in those 40 acres, there was a creek she had not yet walked to, and stands of old-growth timber Chester had paid for slowly over 11 years, and ground that had been waiting for someone to come and decide what it was worth. "No," she said. Boyd was quiet on the other end. "The answer is no," she said. "It will always be no. I am keeping the land." Another pause, then Boyd Holt said something she had not expected from him. His voice changed, the professional warmth dropping away to something more direct. "My grandmother did the same thing," he said. "Family land in upstate New York. We needed the money badly, and she would not sell, and we were angry with her for a long time." He stopped. "We understood eventually." He paused again. "I hope this works out for you, Miss Ashford. I genuinely do." He ended the call before she could respond. She sat with the phone in her hand for a moment. Then she set it on the railing and picked up the property deeds and went inside to find a place to keep them. The weeks that followed had a different quality than any week she had known before. She was still poor. She was still sleeping on the floor until she could arrange to buy a bed. The savings bonds would cover tuition at the community college 20 miles east, but poor in a place that was hers. Felt different from poor in a place she was tolerated. Ezra Webb came back on a Saturday morning with his truck bed full of lumber. He did not knock. He set the wood on the porch and began sorting it by length, which was the behavior of someone who had already decided to work and was not asking permission. Marin came out with 2 cups of coffee and handed him one. He took it without comment. They worked on the porch together through the morning. Ezra did not instruct so much as demonstrate, moving through tasks with the economy of motion that comes from 40 years of repetition. When Marin made a mistake, cutting a board a quarter-inch short of the measurement, he did not point it out directly. He simply picked up the board, looked at it, set it aside for a shorter application, and handed her a new piece without expression. She measured twice before cutting. The second board fit exactly. Around noon, he looked at the new corner post she had fitted and tapped it with one knuckle, testing the joint. Tight, he said. He said it the way a man says something he did not plan to say out loud. She did not make a performance of being pleased. She moved to the next section of railing. Later, when the structural work was done and they were finishing the surface, Ezra said without looking up, Chester taught Joel on a porch not much different from this one. Joel was about 10. Chester said he cried the first time he made a clean joint. Not because he was proud, because he suddenly understood what it meant to make something that would outlast you. Marin kept sanding. Did Joel ever build anything of his own? She asked. He built the house he and your mother lived in when you were born, Ezra said. Framed it himself, every stick of it. Chester said it was the finest piece of residential framing he had ever seen from a man under 30. She stopped sanding. She had not known that. Diane had never told her that. It is still standing, Ezra said. But the bones are sound. I drove past it once just to look. He paused. Chester designed it. Joel built it. That is how it usually works between a father and a son when they are both good at the same thing. She looked down at the railing under her hands. 2 generations of the same trade. She was the third, and she was just beginning. That evening, she enrolled in the spring semester at the community college. Design and carpentry, 2 evenings a week, with a Wednesday afternoon workshop in the machine room. She went to the first class and sat in the back with a notebook and listened to the instructor explain the principles of structural joinery. She had lived inside those principles for 2 weeks already, in the cabin Chester built, and hearing them described in language was different from understanding them in wood and silence, but she found that having both made each one clearer. On her first day in the machine room, she made a box joint on the table saw. The first attempt was loose. The second was tighter. The third fit so closely that the instructor had to look twice. He did not say much. He just moved her to the next station. That was how she understood she had done it right. She joined the volunteer fire department in February. Chief Virginia Marsh ran a tight operation and had a way of looking at new recruits that communicated clearly how much catching up they had to do. Marin caught up quickly. She learned to check hydrants and coil hose and operate the pump controls on the tanker. She learned the names of the 7 other volunteers and which of them to watch when the chief gave a demonstration, because some people show you what the procedure looks like and some people show you what it actually is. She worked weekends at Agnes's store. She knew the customers by name now, knew who needed help carrying things to their trucks and who needed nothing except to be allowed to move through the store in peace. On a Saturday morning in early April, she was restocking the canned goods when a girl came in through the front door. 16, maybe 17. A jacket that was too light for the weather, a backpack worn on one shoulder, hair pulled back tight. She stood inside the door and looked at the room the way a person looks at a place when they are deciding whether it is safe enough to stay in. Marin recognized the posture. She had stood that way many times. The girl walked to the back of the store and stood in front of the refrigerated case where the sandwiches were kept. She looked at the price labels. She took some money from her pocket, counted it, and put it back. She turned to leave. Hey, Marin said. The girl stopped. You want a sandwich? I do not have enough. I did not ask you that. The girl looked at her. Marin came around the counter and opened the refrigerated case and took out a turkey sandwich and a bottle of water and set them on the counter. She rang them through and paid with her own money and pushed them across to the girl. You can sit, she said. She pulled the wooden stool from behind the counter and set it near the window. Take as long as you need. The girl sat. She unwrapped the sandwich and ate it slowly, not looking up. Marin went back to the shelves and kept working. She did not ask where the girl was from. She did not ask where she was going. She just let her eat. When the girl finished, she folded the wrapper carefully and put it in the trash and walked to the counter. "Thank you," she said. "You are welcome." Marin took a notepad from next to the register and wrote down a number. "If you need anything," she said, "call this. My name is Marin. I am here most weekends." The girl took the paper. She looked at it for a moment, folded it once, and put it in the pocket of her jacket. Then she walked out. Agnes appeared at Marin's shoulder. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "Chester did that once," Agnes said quietly. "Years ago, a young man came in with not quite enough for a meal. Chester paid the difference without making a thing of it." Marin watched the girl cross the parking lot and turn south down the main road. "Some things just pass on," she said, "whether you mean them to or not." She called her mother every week. The calls were short at first, 10 minutes, sometimes less. They were not comfortable, but they were honest, and honesty turned out to be a better foundation than comfort, because it was load-bearing in a way that comfort was not. Diane asked about the garden. Marin told her. Diane asked about the carpentry class. Marin told her about the box joint. Diane said, "Joel used to say that the first clean joint you make tells you what kind of craftsman you are going to be." Marin was quiet for a moment. "You never told me things like that," she said. "About him." "I know," Diane said. I should have. I should have told you so many things." The box arrived on a Monday. Marin opened it on the porch in the morning light. Inside were photographs she had never seen. Herself as a newborn in the yellow blanket. Joel on the couch with her asleep on his chest, his eyes closed too, both of them completely at rest. And Chester, in a flannel shirt, holding her in the crook of one arm and looking down at her with an expression that needed no translation. She had his jaw, his eyebrows. His hands, already visible in miniature, curled against his forearm. 3 years of a family she had not been allowed to remember. She kept all of the photographs. She made frames for them in the carpentry workshop, simple ones, clean joints, and set them on the bookshelf she had built beside the fireplace. Chester by the fireplace, Joel in a yard somewhere, squinting into the sun, Marin in the yellow blanket. The cabin filled up slowly with the faces of the people who had loved her. On an evening in late April, she sat on the porch in the rocking chair she had brought from a second-hand shop in town, oak and worn smooth from years of use. The sky was moving through its colors above the tree line, orange and then rose, and then the deep blue that comes just before dark. The air smelled like turned soil from the garden she had planted behind the cabin, tomatoes and beans and lettuce in rows she had measured with Chester's tape measure. She looked down at her hands in the fading light. There was a callus at the base of her right thumb where the plain handle had raised a blister 2 weeks ago, which had broken and healed and hardened into something permanent. Ezra had seen it and not commented on it, which was his way of acknowledging it. She could hear the creak. She had walked to it, finally, the week before, following the sound east through the trees until the ground softened and sloped down to the water. It was narrow and quick, running over a flat bed of dark stone, and it made the sound she had been hearing from the cabin. Since the first night, a sound she had mistaken for distance, but which was simply the sound of water moving over things that do not move. Chester had known that sound every morning of the 15 years he lived here. He had sat on this porch and heard it, and looked at the same tree line and watched the same light move through the same branches and waited. He had not waited passively. He had worked every day of that waiting. But underneath the work, underneath the building and the saving and the writing and the hiding and the hoping, there had been a stillness in him that she was only now beginning to understand. He had believed she would come, not wished it, not hoped it, in the fragile way that hopes exist when people are not sure of them. He had believed it the way you believe in a joint you have cut correctly, with the certainty that comes from having done the preparation right. She had come. She had found everything he left her. She was sitting in the chair he had built, on the porch he had built, on the land he had assembled piece by piece so that no one could take it away from the girl he had held once and loved without interruption for the rest of his life. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out the letter Joel had written to his father the week before the scaffold came down. She had been carrying it with her since she found it. She unfolded it carefully, by memory now, her fingers knowing exactly where each crease was. She read the last lines. "If something happens, which it will not, take care of Marin for me. Take care of my little girl. Promise me that, Dad." Chester had made that promise. He had made it to a son who was already gone by the time Chester was sober enough to understand what it meant, and he had kept it in the only way that was left to him, in wood and in time, in the careful fitted joints of a cabin that was still standing, and in the letters hidden inside its walls, and in the land surrounding it that no one could touch. She folded the letter and put it back in her pocket. Inside the cabin, on the table, beside the wooden chair, the music box sat where she had left it that morning. She wound it when she went in. She sat in Chester's chair and let it play and looked at the photographs on the shelf he had built. And she understood again, as she understood each time, that the inheritance was never only the money. The money was proof. The land was proof. The bonds and the deeds and the documents were the language of a legal system that required things to be written down. But the real inheritance was this, the fact that someone had believed in her arrival so completely that he had spent 15 years preparing for it. The fact that she had been loved, without reservation and without condition, by someone she never had the chance to know. She had arrived with $34 and a duffel bag and a photograph she had been carrying. For so long she had forgotten what it felt like not to carry it. She had arrived not knowing what she was looking for, only that the alternative to looking was to stop. And she had decided a long time ago, in ways she could not have articulated, that she was not going to stop. She looked at the tree line and the last of the light, 40 acres, a cabin built by hand, letters in the walls, saved for the day someone came looking, a grandfather she knew now through wood and words, and the testimony of people who had watched him wait. The sky went dark. The first stars appeared above the eastern tree line. The creek ran on through the trees in the direction she now knew by heart. She got up from the rocking chair and went inside and wound the music box and sat down in the chair her grandfather had built, and let the notes fill the room, one at a time, patient and clear, the same as they had always been, the same as they would be tomorrow, unhurried and certain and quietly, completely, unconditionally hers.